Well, hello there, fellow geeks and geekettes. Psycho Sab's back, and today I want to talk about DC Black Label and whether it's worth it. By which I mean, whether there is any point, any sense to publishing comic books and graphic novels under the imprint of DC Comics called DC Black Label. Now, what is it actually? What's DC Black Label? Well, it's basically a replacement for the Vertigo comics, which was an imprint of DC for a long time, and it was established in the early 90s, I believe, and comic books and graphic novels of a more mature content were published under Vertigo. Comic books and graphic novels intended for a more adult audience, with more mature and explicit content, a bit more complex, a bit more intelligent. They were comic books for the grown-ups, such as Sandman series by Neil Gaiman, or Hellblazer, or Preacher, I believe. So these things were published under the imprint of DC Comics called Vertigo. Now, it was a bit similar to what Marvel did with their Max series, although that was more about the violence and the explicit graphic content. Like if you compare Punisher by Garth Ennis and Punisher Max by Garth Ennis, two series about Punisher written by the same author, but they were very different from each other in that they showed the violent graphic content differently. So the regular Marvel title was, like normal. They didn't show that much blood, that much violence, that much gore, whereas Punisher Max was much more explicit, much more gore, much more violent. There was, a lot more blood and intestines flying and spilling everywhere, Punisher killing people in the most imaginative ways. Whereas Vertigo was also about the stories being more like on the a little bit higher level. Now, DC Comics got rid of Vertigo. I'm not going to go into details, into the reasons and the politics behind, the company and why they cancelled the Vertigo imprint. I know that many people were sad about it. I wasn't excited about Vertigo being cancelled, but what can you do, right? You can Google it if you want to know more about that. But what is important for this video is that they replaced it to a certain extent with DC Black Label, which means that suddenly there were there were before the shutdown, before the pencils down thing and the very unpleasant situation in the world right now. There were two main kinds of comic books published by DC Comics. It was the regular comic books published and the DC Black Label, which once again, according to DC Comics, even before they started DC Black Label, was to be an imprint under which more adult comic books, more sophisticated comic books would be published. Mostly comics of a prestige format, written by the star writers and the star artists, drawn by the star artists of the industry. So, for instance, the first title published under the DC Black Label was Batman Damned, written by Brian Azzarello and drawn by Lee Bermejo. I have just recently acquired a collected edition, deluxe collected edition, so I upgraded from my floppies. As you can see, the format is quite different from a regular comic book. Now, not all DC Black Label comics are that big, right? For instance, this is another comic from the DC Black Label imprint, and that's Batman White Knight. Well, and the size of this issue is of a regular comic book issue, which means this is that big. Look, you can see that, right? So some of the comics are of a regular size, some of them are of this prestige format, then of course being collected in these big collected editions with a more adult content. Now, besides new comic book series being written, drawn and published under the DC imprint, whenever they decide to reprint something that was previously under the Vertigo or under regular DC Comics, but with a more sophisticated content, they now reprint it under the DC Black Label brand, such as, for instance, I have just recently acquired this deluxe edition of Watchmen. I own many versions, many copies of Watchmen, but it came in a nice slipcase, so I needed to get it. But the important thing is that it came out under the DC Black Label imprint. So far, all the comics I've shown you are very good. Let me just sip on my energy drink because my throat is getting dry. A bit of ice there. Now, so far, all the comics, all these are very good comic books. The new ones, like Batman Damned, Batman White Knight, by Sean Gordon Murphy, very good comics, or Watchmen, a cult classic. What more do you want to say? Whereas the regular comic books published by DC Comics, they tended to steer towards what they think is towards younger audiences. But people, believe me, I'm a teacher. Young people don't read comics anymore. Kids, children, and teenagers, they don't care about comic books. They don't read them. If they read something, they read manga. They watch TV shows. They watch action films. But they don't. But they are not fans. Like, you don't have like millions and millions and millions of kids and teenagers in the world being brutally in love and involved in things like Batman, Superman, in things like other pop culture phenomena like Star Wars. Like, kids used to be in love with Star Wars brutally, hysterically. Nowadays kids are not. They love social media like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and they watch TV shows, because, they have an access to many platforms like Netflix and now DC Plus. But not many kids watch DC. I mean Disney Plus, but not many kids watch DC like Disney things anymore, right? So DC started to do things like Gotham High or Green Lantern: The Far Sector. It wasn't even called Green Lantern, just Far Sector, which is basically taking established characters that have been popular for decades and decades and decades, like Batman, and they changed the character into something which the character isn't. Like, they, in the latest disaster called Gotham High, they basically made every single character or every single protagonist, like Batman, Catwoman, they made them into young Asians. So Bruce Wayne is an Asian student at Gotham High, and he's very popular on Twitter or something like that. So, and I think that it even specifically says he doesn't have friends, he has followers. Now, all the villains, they remain the same. White men. I'm not going to go into that, but make your own conclusions. Now, in the Far Sector, they got rid of every single good Green Lantern that they have ever written about. Like, they didn't kill them, but they don't focus on them. And they introduced somebody which is very similar to Riri Williams when she replaced Iron Man in Marvel Comics. Now, Batman, the main title, was written by Tom King until recently. And the majority of the comic book issues were about Batman crying and being depressed and lying in his bed with Catwoman and complaining that life is tough and that nobody understands him. Or he was lying on the beach with Catwoman and complaining about life being unfair. Now, occasionally there were things like Green Lantern by Grant Morrison, which were just limited series. It wasn't an ongoing title, right? And these were good, like fantastic. I mean Green Lantern by Grant Morrison. But Gotham High, Far Sector, Batman by Tom King, these are published under the regular DC Comics. Nobody likes them, nobody reads them. Just look at the internet, look at the social media. The sales go down, people don't like it. On the other hand, all the titles being published under the DC Black Label imprint, people love. And the first edition of the collected Batman Damned hardcover has already, I believe, been sold out. Because it's very good. It's drawn beautifully, the writing is grasping, and they are reprinting all the good stuff under the DC Black Label. Like Joker by Lee Bermejo and Brian Azzarello, Luthor, Watchmen. I think that Sandman is about to be reprinted under the DC Black Label imprint. So, DC Black Label sells very good because they publish good comics. Regular DC Comics is steering towards what they think is young audiences, but it really isn't. And they are deconstructing all the good characters. And those things then, those comic books, as a result of this deconstruction, they are not selling. So, the conclusion of this video is this. Is DC Black Label worth it? Well, yes! It's the only thing about the comic book industry before the shutdowns and the pencils down that I considered to be really worth reading. I read everything that was published under the DC Black Label, and I loved majority of it, or all of it, right? On the other hand, I read Batman by Tom King. I know, it's my personal opinion. Everybody is entitled to their own personal opinion. If you like Batman by Tom King, I'm happy for you. Enjoy it. I didn't. Not my cup of tea. Didn't enjoy Gotham High. Didn't enjoy Far Sector. Didn't enjoy Batman by Tom King. Actually, I didn't enjoy any title of the DC Rebirth like relaunch. So yeah, that's the gist of it. And I say that it is just my recommendation. If the DC Comics is revived after this pandemic is over, I suggest strongly that they focus on publishing under the DC Black Label imprint as much as possible, because it is the only thing worth about the comic book industry. But that would be all from me, my friends. See you soon. Please share your own opinions in the comments down below, and bye.